Today, we'll be talking about one of everyone's favorite topics, NIST 853, specifically the changes that have come about with the update from Rev.4 to Rev.5. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of Hive Live. I'm Katie Dodson, and before we get started, if you've been following us here on our YouTube channel, make sure you stay up to date with all of our great approachable cybersecurity content across our other social media channels. Be sure to follow us so you don't miss out on the latest cybersecurity news, our research, and free guides developed by our experts. So, time to dive into what you came here for, breaking down NIST 853 Rev 5. Moving on to IA, there were quite a few changes made here. So there is a new base control related to identity proofing. There are 4 new enhancements. Most of them impact moderate and high, but IA 12.4 is only the high environment. There were 2 controls added to the moderate baseline. So IA 4.4, identify user status, and IA 5.6, protection of authenticators. The high baseline has 3 new controls. So IA 2.5, individual authentication with group authentication, IA 4.4, identify user status, and IA 5.6, protection of authenticators. There were a lot of different controls that were withdrawn and incorporated elsewhere, so that did have a significant impact on the text and parameter changes because those controls kind of just got shifted around a lot in IA. All right, so IA 12, the new base control that impacts moderate and high, is your identity proofing. So you're required to identity proof users that require accounts for logical access to systems are based on appropriate identity assurance level requirements as specified in applicable standards and guidance, resolve user identities to a unique individual, and collect, validate, and verify identity evidence. IA 12.2 also impacts moderate and high. It's specific to the identity evidence piece of IA 12. You must require evidence of individual identification be presented to the registration authority. IA 12.3 also impacts moderate and high. Require that the presented identity evidence be validated and verified through organizational defined methods of validation and verification. 12.4 again only impacts high, so require that the validation and verification of identity evidence be conducted in person before a designated registration authority. 12.5 impacts both moderate and high. Require that a registration code or notice of proofing be delivered through an out-of-band channel to verify the user's address, physical or digital, of record. So those are all of the new controls and enhancements. Moving into the changes to the existing ones, IA 2.1 has just been generalized. It took out the word network. So it's just authentication for access to privileged accounts as a whole. This does impact low, moderate, and high. 2.2, same thing, took out network just to generalize this a little more. 2.5 had a minor change to require users to be individually authenticated before granting access to the shared accounts or resources. This only impacts high. 2.8, there is a new parameter selection. So it was generalized by taking out the word network, but you have to use the replay resistant authentication mechanisms for access to either privileged or non-privileged accounts or both. You have that selection here. IA 4 added service as a type of identifier. So receive authorization from organization-defined personnel or roles to assign individual, group, role, service, or device identifier. So service was added throughout. But then Part E was removed. So the requirement to disable an identifier after an organization-defined time period of inactivity is no longer a requirement for IA 4. Moving on to IA 5, your authenticator management. Not a lot of change here until you get down to E and F. So F was taken out completely. Previously, you had to establish minimum and maximum lifetime restrictions and reuse conditions for authenticators. That is no longer the case. Part E, you have to change the default authenticators prior to first use. So the language there for first use was changed. Part G, you also have to change or refresh the authenticators when organization-defined events occur. And then again, some language changes here. Security safeguards is now controls. 5.1 had some big changes. This is our password-based authentication here. So now we'll just go through the whole thing because it had some substantial changes. So this impacts low, moderate, and high. Part A, you have to maintain a list of commonly used, expected, or compromised passwords and update the list at an organization-defined frequency and when organizational passwords are suspected to have been compromised directly or indirectly. So the password list requirement is new. Verify when users create or update passwords that the passwords are not found on the list from Part A. Part C is the same. Part D, previously you could store only cryptographically protected passwords. Now that requirement is store passwords using an approved salted key derivation function, preferably using a keyed hash. E is new, require immediate selection of a new password upon account recovery. F, allow user selection of long passwords and passphrases, including spaces and all principal characters. G, employ automated tools to assist the user in selecting strong password authenticators. And then H took out all the different bits and pieces related to your password criteria and complexity. So you still have the parameter to define your composition and complexity rules, but there are no specific requirements in IA 5.1 about case sensitivity, number of characters, using a mix of uppercase, lowercase numbers and special characters, and things of that nature. 5.2 is just a minor change. Part 2, they took out in case of inability to access revocation information via the network, so not really any change to the control implementation here. 8.1, minor change, specifically saying PIV compliant credentials rather than just PIV credentials. 8.2, they have now removed the requirement for FICAM. So Part A accepts only external authenticators that are NIST compliant rather than FICAM approved. And Part B is new, document and maintain a list of accepted external authenticators. So this one is a pretty big change if you were using FICAM approved specifically in the past. Again, IA 8.4 removes the FICAM requirement. So conform to the following profiles for identity management, and then you can define what those identities are. IA 11 just took out devices, the requirement to re-authenticate devices, just specific to users now. And that's it for IA. Moving right along into IR, there is a new enhancement, IR 4.11, about integrated incident response team. This is only going to impact the high baseline. 2 controls were withdrawn and incorporated into other parts of IR, and there were some control text and parameter changes. So the new enhancement, again, only impacting high, establish and maintain an integrated incident response team that can be deployed to any location identified by the organization within an organization-defined time period. All right, so IR2 here took out information from information system, but Part B is new. This does impact privacy, low, moderate, and high. So for Part B, you have to review and update your incident response training content at an organization-defined frequency and following organization-defined events. We saw this with CP as well. IR2.1, very minor language change here from facilitating effective response to facilitating the required response, only impacts high. IR2.2, you have to define what the automated mechanisms are that you're using for incident response training. IR4, incident handling. So again, impacting privacy, low, moderate, and high. Your incident handling capability, they took out reference specifically to security incidents because they also want you to be focusing on privacy incidents and other incidents as well. But the incident handling capability must be consistent with the incident response plan. And then Part D is also new. Ensure the rigor, intensity, scope, and results of incident handling activities are comparable and predictable across the organization. IR 4.1, again, just requiring you to define what the automated mechanisms are for incident handling. IR 5 has just been generalized, track and document incidents. So took out information system security from that control language. 5.1, defining what the automated mechanisms are that you're using to track incidents and collect and analyze incident information. This does only impact high. IR6 has been generalized, taking out references to security. So this will also impact privacy incidents. 6.1, defining the automated mechanisms used for incident reporting. IR7, taking out reference to security to generalize the types of incidents that fall under this control. IR8, your incident response plan. So there is some new criteria in here for your incident response plan. It needs to address the sharing of incident information. It needs to be reviewed and approved at an organization-defined frequency. And it also needs to explicitly designate responsibility for incident response to organization-defined entities, personnel, or roles. And that's it for IR8. That's it for IR. Moving along to MA, there was a control that was added to the moderate baseline for preventing unauthorized removal of maintenance tools. MA42 was withdrawn and incorporated into other parts of MA, and there were some text and parameter changes. So MA2, so schedule, document, and review records of maintenance, repair, and replacement on system components. That's new for Part A. Part B, you have to approve and monitor all maintenance activities, whether performed on-site or remotely, and whether the system or system components are serviced on-site or removed. So that's just changing equipment to system or system components. Again, C, just adding replacement. D, adding replacement, but also requiring you to define what information is going to be sanitized from all of those system or system components as well. So previously, Part D was sanitize equipment to remove all information from associated media. Now you can specify which information needs to be sanitized rather than all of it. MA22 have to define the automated mechanisms in place for scheduling, conducting, and documenting maintenance, repair, and replacement. And producing up-to-date, accurate, and complete records of all maintenance, repair, and replacement actions requested. This does only impact the high baseline. MA3, Part B is new, so this does impact moderate and high. Now you have to review previously approved system maintenance tools at an organization-defined frequency. You can't just approve them once and then forget about them. MA4, really minor change, just took out information from information system. 5, again, minor change, just changed from ensure to verify. 5.1 took out information from information system. Part B does now have a parameter, so develop and implement organization-defined alternate controls in the event a system component cannot be sanitized, removed, or disconnected. This does impact the high baseline. And that's it for MA. MP, there are 2 controls that were withdrawn, so there's no new controls, no new enhancements, no updates to the baselines here, and then some text and parameter changes. So MP3, minor change, took out information from information system. MP4, again, took out information from information system, and then just clarifies that Part B is protecting system media types defined in MP4A. MP5, minor change, changing security safeguards to controls, taking out information from information system. MP6, taking out information from information system, taking out in accordance with applicable federal and organizational standards and policies. So just kind of generalizes that a little bit more. 6.2, switching from verify to ensure. So again, a minor change. MP7, Part B is new here. So prohibit the use of portable storage devices in organizational systems when such devices have no identifiable owner. So that's new for media use MP7. That impacts low, moderate, and high. And that's it for MP. Moving on to PE, there is a new control for the moderate baseline, detection systems, automatic activation and notification. A number of controls were withdrawn and incorporated elsewhere. Most of them were incorporated into other parts of PE. You can see PE 3.6 is now in CA. And then there were some text and parameter changes here as well. So PE3, fairly minor changes, taking out information from information system. Part D, escort visitors and control visitor activity rather than monitoring visitor activity. That's a change for Part D here. And then G, change combinations and keys at an organization-defined frequency and or when keys are lost, combinations are compromised, or when individuals possessing those keys or combinations are transferred or terminated. PE4, minor change, just taking out information and changing security safeguards to controls. PE5 has a new parameter, so control physical access to output from organization-defined output devices to prevent unauthorized individuals from obtaining the output. 6.1 is a minor change, so previously it just said monitor physical intrusion alarms. Now it's monitor physical access to the facility where the system resides using physical intrusion alarms, so minor change. PE8, Part C is new, so report anomalies in visitor access records to organization-defined personnel. That's a new requirement for the low, moderate, and high baselines. 8.1 wants you to define the automated mechanisms that are in use for maintaining and reviewing visitor access records. PE10, there's some new parameters here. So provide the capability of shutting off power to organization-defined systems or individual system components. That one is a new parameter. And then Part B, just clarifying access for authorized personnel. PE11 is a minor change. They took out short term. So now you just have to provide an uninterruptible power supply. It does not have to be a specifically short term uninterruptible power supply. 11.1, similar to the previous one, took out long term. So provide an alternate power supply for the system that is activated manually or automatically. So there is a parameter now. This does impact only the high baseline. 13, just minor change, took out for the information system. PE 13.2, so this one only impacts the high baseline. The fire suppression systems activate automatically. That part is new for Part A. And then Part B is new, employ an automatic fire suppression capability when the facility is not staffed on a continuous basis. Moving on to 14, there is a new parameter selection here. So you can maintain temperature, humidity, pressure, radiation, or organization-defined environmental control levels for Part A now. So you can choose one or more of those. And then Part B used to specify monitoring temperature and humidity control levels. Now it's just environmental control levels based on whatever you've selected for Part A. This does impact low, moderate, and high. PE 15.1, you have to define the automated mechanisms that are in place for detecting the presence of water near the system and alerting personnel. This only impacts high. PE 16 took out the word monitor from Part A, so just authorize and control the organization-defined types of system components entering and exiting the facility. PE 17A is new, so determine and document the organization-defined alternate work sites allowed for use by employees, and then added some language to include privacy as well, not just security personnel for Part D. All right, moving along to Part PL. So one control was withdrawn, and there were a couple of text changes, not a lot of changes to the PL section here. All right, so PL2, a lengthy one again. This is related to previously your SSP, but now it is your security and privacy plan. So I'm sure there will be additional guidance about how this may change the templates that we've been using for these, but all of the language has now been updated to include privacy as part of that plan as well. So for your security and privacy plan, Part 2, rather than talking specifically about the authorization boundary, wants you to explicitly define constituent system components. Part 4, identify the individuals that fulfill system roles and responsibilities. Part 5, identify the information types processed, stored, and transmitted by the system. Moving further down, describe any specific threats to the system that are of concern to the organization. Provide the results of a privacy risk assessment for systems processing PII. Here we have a little bit of language change here. So describe the operational environment for the system and any dependencies on or connections to other systems or system components. Previously, that was relationships or connections. Again, part 10 is incorporating privacy. 11, identify any relevant control baselines or overlays. Adding privacy again here. Include risk determinations for security and privacy architecture and design decisions. Include security and privacy related activities affecting the system that require planning and coordination with organization-defined individuals or groups. So those are the parts that are new for PL2. There were some bits and pieces taken out as well, specific to security controls and information systems, to kind of generalize that so that it's now system security and privacy plans. PL4, again, added privacy. So rather than make readily available, you now have to provide the description of responsibilities and expected behavior for information system usage, security, and privacy to your employees. And then you have to receive a documented acknowledgement, so it does not have to be signed. It's just a minor language change there as well to kind of show that it needs to be acknowledged, documented, but not necessarily physically signed. And then for part D here, again, rather than signed, it's saying acknowledged, but requiring individuals who have acknowledged a previous version of the rules of behavior to read and re-acknowledge at an organization-defined frequency or when the rules are revised or updated. So just another requirement there and another parameter selection for how often they have to re-acknowledge the rules of behavior. PL4.1, rules of behavior related to social media and external sites and applications. So part A used to be specific to social media and social networking. Now it also includes external sites and applications. And part C is new. The rules of behavior need to include restrictions on use of organization-provided identifiers, such as email addresses, and authentication secrets for creating accounts on external sites and applications. So basically covering down on not using your same password that you use for work for signing up for subscription service somewhere else. PL8 had some language to add privacy to your security and privacy architecture. Part A2 here is new as well. Describe the requirements and approach to be taken for processing PII to minimize privacy risk. And then part C, reflect planned architecture changes in security and privacy plans, ConOps, criticality analysis, organizational procedures, and procurements and acquisitions. So that impacts your privacy, your moderate, and your high, but not your low baseline. All right, so PM, this is a family that is only going to impact the privacy baseline. So it's not one that we are going to really see in your security baselines for low, moderate, and high. So PM3 is related to information security and privacy resources. Some of the changes made here, and again, a lot of these controls were in the appendix to Rev.4, so you may be familiar with some of them already if you've incorporated them. But for anyone who was focusing on the security baselines, these will be new. So PM3, include the resources needed to implement the information security and privacy programs in capital planning and investment requests, and document all exceptions to this requirement. Prepare documentation required for addressing information security and privacy programs in capital planning and investment requests in accordance with applicable laws, executive orders, directives, policies, regulations, and standards, and make available for expenditure the planned information security and privacy resources. Part D here about employing a business case or Exhibit 300 or 53 to record the resources is no longer a requirement. Part 4 was modified to add privacy and supply chain risk management. So plan of action and milestones process specific to privacy. Implement a process to ensure that plans of action and milestones for the information security, privacy, and supply chain risk management programs and associated organizational systems are developed and maintained. Document the remedial information security, privacy, and supply chain risk management actions to adequately respond to risk to organizational operations and assets, individuals, other organizations in the nation, and are reported in accordance with established reporting requirements. Review plans of action and milestones for consistency with the organizational risk management strategy and organization-wide priorities for risk response actions. PM6 was modified to add privacy, so develop, monitor, and report on the results of information security and privacy measures of performance. PM7, develop and maintain an enterprise architecture with consideration for information security, privacy, and the resulting risk to organizational operations and assets, individuals, other organizations, and the nation. PM8, again, added privacy, so address information security and privacy issues in the development, documentation, and updating of a critical infrastructure and key resources protection plan. PM9, added privacy, develop a comprehensive strategy to manage security risk to organizational operations and assets, individuals, other organizations, and the nation associated with the operation and use of organizational systems, and privacy risk to individuals resulting from the authorized processing of PII, implement the risk management strategy consistently across the organization, and review and update the risk management strategy at an organization-defined frequency or as required to address organizational changes. PM10, manage the security and privacy state of organizational systems and the environments in which those systems operate through authorization processes, designate individuals to fulfill specific roles and responsibilities within the organizational risk management process, and integrate the authorization processes into an organization-wide risk management program. PM11, define organizational mission and business processes with consideration for information security and privacy, and the resulting risk to organizational operations, organizational assets, individuals, other organizations, and the nation, and determine information protection and PII processing needs arising from the defined mission and business processes, and review and revise the mission and business processes at an organization-defined frequency. PM13, again, just adding privacy, establish a security and privacy workforce development and improvement program. And that's it for PM. So wanted to go through all of those in detail since it's not one that, those aren't controls that we are as commonly aware of when it comes to the security baselines. All right, moving on to PS. There is a new base control related to position descriptions, and there were a couple of text and parameter changes. So the new base control, PS9, is going to impact your low, moderate, and high baselines. You now need to incorporate security and privacy roles and responsibilities into organizational position descriptions. PS4, minor change, taking out information from information system, but Part F is no longer required. So when an employee is terminated, you no longer have to notify a specific personnel or role within an organization-defined time period. I believe that requirement was actually incorporated into another control rather than being part of PS4. PS4.2 is specific to the high baseline. There were quite a few changes here to your parameter selections. So you have to define the automated mechanisms that are in use for personnel termination, and then use those mechanisms to notify defined personnel or roles of individual termination actions, and disable access to system resources. PS6, just a minor change, taking out information from information systems. And then C, changing from ensuring that individuals requiring access to organizational information and information systems do what are part of Part 1 and Part 2. Just change that language to verify that individuals requiring access to information and systems. So kind of just changing it from ensure to verify, a little more general language there. PS7, again, minor, changed the term third party to external throughout. And then Part E, monitor provider compliance with personnel security requirements. So just minor changes here. And that's it. All right, so RA has two new base controls. So risk response, which impacts privacy low, moderate, and high, and criticality analysis, which impacts moderate and high. There are also two new enhancements that impact the low, moderate, and high baselines. So supply chain risk assessment and public disclosure program. Updating vulnerabilities to be scanned for vulnerability monitoring and scanning was added to the low baseline. So that was not a requirement previously for low and is now. One control was withdrawn, and there were some text and parameter changes as well. All right, so new base control RA7 impacts privacy low, moderate, and high. It's related to risk response. So respond to findings from privacy and security assessments, monitoring, and audits in accordance with organizational risk tolerance. RA9 is also new, impacts moderate and high. Identify critical system components and functions by performing a criticality analysis for organization-defined systems, system components, or system services at organization-defined decision points in the system development lifecycle. New enhancement RA31 impacts low, moderate, and high. Now you are required to assess supply chain risks associated with organization-defined systems, system components, and system services, and update the supply chain risk assessment at an organization-defined frequency when there are significant changes to the relevant supply chain or when changes to the system, environments of operation, or other conditions may necessitate a change in the supply chain. And then RA511 only impacts moderate and high. Establish a public reporting channel for receiving reports of vulnerabilities in organizational systems and system components. All right, so RA2 had a couple of changes here. This does impact low, moderate, and high. So they took out the specific language related to categorizing information in accordance with laws, executive orders, directives, blah, blah, blah. Now you just have to categorize the system and information it processes, stores, and transmits. And then again, minor language changes for information system and switching ensure to verify. RA3, a couple changes here related to risk assessments. So your risk assessment now has to identify threats to and vulnerabilities in the system. Part 3 is also new, determine the likelihood and impact of adverse effects on individuals arising from the processing of PII. So it's incorporating your privacy there. Part B is also new, integrate risk assessment results and risk management decisions from the organization and mission or business process perspectives with system level risk assessments. Part C, just updating the language to incorporate privacy plans rather than just security plans. And same thing with Part F, incorporating privacy, and then some minor language changes there. RA5 just updates the language to specify monitoring, not just scanning. So Part A, monitor and scan for vulnerabilities. Employ vulnerability monitoring tools. Part C, analyzing the scan reports and results from vulnerability monitoring. So just kind of changing the language here from scanning to monitoring throughout. And then Part F is new, employ vulnerability monitoring tools that include the capability to readily update the vulnerabilities to be scanned. This does impact low, moderate, and high. RA54 has been generalized a little bit. So previously the language was specific to determining information about the system that is discoverable by adversaries and subsequently taking action. This is only going to impact your high baseline, but now it's just identifying what information is discoverable in general and taking corrective actions for that, not necessarily subsequently taking actions on that. 5.5, minor change, just took out the word selected here, so it's really not going to make any sort of difference to the implementation of this control. And then moving into SA, we're getting close, just a few more families to go. So SA 5.4 was added to the high baseline. It's related to system component and service configurations as part of the acquisition process. And then there were quite a few controls that had text and parameter changes. And then this crazy looking page here, a lot of the SA controls were withdrawn and incorporated elsewhere. And a lot of that has to do with the addition of the new SR control family that we will get into at the end of this deck related to supply chain risk management. All right, so SA2 impacts privacy low, moderate, and high. Just added some language about incorporating privacy requirements as well when it comes to allocation of resources. Same thing with SA3, added privacy throughout. Part A also had a little bit of a language change here. Rather than just managing the information system, it's now acquire, develop, and manage the system. So minor change there. All right, SA4. This is your acquisition process. So you can see throughout that privacy has been added. Again, any language that's specified in accordance with laws, executive orders, and all those things has been taken out. But there have been some additional changes here as well. So there is now a parameter selection. Include the following requirements, descriptions, and criteria explicitly or by reference using standardized contract language or organization-defined contract language. So you have a choice there. in the acquisition contract for the system component, or system service. Part D is new. You need to include the controls needed to satisfy the security and privacy requirements. And then H is also new, allocation of responsibility or identification of parties responsible for information security, privacy, and supply chain risk management. 4.9 just took out the requirement to do this control early in the system development lifecycle. You just have to do this process at some point or whenever it makes sense in your process rather than early. SA5 just added some language to incorporate privacy here in your system documentation. SA8, this does impact low, moderate, and high. There is now a parameter at the end. So defining the system security and privacy engineering principles for specification, design, development, implementation, and modification of the system and system components. So they actually want you to spell out what those principles are. SA9 just had some changes to add privacy, took out some references to security control, information system, and things of that nature. SA10 had two changes. So this does impact both moderate and high, added some language for privacy, but you can also see that Part A now has disposal as an option in your parameter selection. So perform configuration management during system component or service design, development, implementation, operation, or disposal. So that's a new parameter. SA11 has a little bit of a language change here. So it did incorporate privacy, but you can see at the beginning, require the developer of the system component, or system service at all post-design stages of the system development lifecycle to do parts A through E. You also, for Part B now, have to do testing and evaluation at an organization-defined frequency. So there's a new parameter there as well. Moving on to SA15, just added privacy to your development process standards and tools. 15.3 is another one that was just kind of rearranged and reformatted. The nature of the control and the language is the same. It's just in kind of a different order to make more sense. 16 added privacy. This only impacts your high baseline. 17 also added privacy. 22. So this one did have some changes here to Part B. Previously, it was just provide justification and document approval for unsupported components. Now, you have to provide the following options for alternative sources for continued support for unsupported components, and then define whether you're going to use in-house support or organization-defined support from external providers. Moving on to SC. There was a control that was added to the moderate baseline, so SC7.8, route traffic to authenticated proxy servers. 3 of the controls were withdrawn and incorporated elsewhere, and there were some text and parameter changes. So SC5, your denial of service protection, this does impact low, moderate, and high. Now you have a parameter right at the beginning, so you can protect against the effects of denial of service events or limit the effects of the following types of denial of service events. And then Part B, you have to define what controls by type of denial of service event now. So rather than just defining a blanket security safeguard you're going to use, you have to note which denial of service events you're defining here and what controls are going to be used for each of those types of events. SC7 just added privacy. All right, so SC7.4, boundary protection for external telecommunications services. This impacts your moderate and your high control baselines. F, G, and H are new. So prevent unauthorized exchange of control plane traffic with external networks. Publish information to enable remote networks to detect unauthorized control plane traffic from internal networks, and filter unauthorized control plane traffic from external networks. 7.5 has a parameter now, so this does impact your moderate and high. Actually, it's not so much a new parameter as it's giving you additional options for the parameter selection. So previously, you had to deny network communications traffic by default and allow network communications traffic by exception at managed interfaces. Now you also can do that for organization-defined systems. 7.7, this one, the language changed so much that I just rewrote it. So previously in Rev.4, the language was the information system in conjunction with a remote device prevents the device from simultaneously establishing non-remote connections with the system and communicating via some other connection to resources and external networks. Now, the language just says prevent split tunneling for remote devices connecting to organizational systems unless the split tunnel is securely provisioned using organization-defined safeguards, and that is a new parameter as well for both moderate and high. 721, just a minor change. They went and changed the word separate to isolate. This is only going to impact your high baseline. 8.1, they did change this a little bit as well. So this is going to impact your moderate and high. Previously, you could say implement cryptographic mechanisms to prevent unauthorized disclosure of information and to detect changes to information during transmission unless otherwise protected by organization-defined alternative physical safeguards. You can no longer do that second part of that statement. You do have to implement those cryptographic mechanisms during transmission. There is no option for unless otherwise protected by alternate physical safeguards. SC13 Part A is new, so determine the organization-defined cryptographic uses. This is going to impact your low, moderate, and high. SC15 just adds language to say prohibit remote activation of collaborative computing devices and applications, again impacting low, moderate, and high. 17 Part B is new, so include only approved trust anchors in trust stores or certificate stores managed by the organization. It's going to impact your moderate and high. SC18 Part C was removed, so for mobile code, there is no longer a requirement to establish usage restrictions and implementation guidance for acceptable mobile code and mobile code technologies. SC24, a little bit of change to the parameter language at the end here. So the parameter now says list of organization-defined types of system failures on organization-defined system components. So again, this is only going to impact your high for failing in a known state. SC28.1, a little bit of language change here. So implement cryptographic mechanisms to prevent unauthorized disclosure and modification of the following information at rest on components or media. So that's new, and that's it. So moving on to SI, there is a new base control only for the privacy baseline. So that's SI19 about de-identification. The high baseline got a couple of new controls. So system generated alerts, wireless intrusion detection, privileged users, unauthorized network services, and integrity verification. And then there were some controls with text and parameter changes. And then again, quite a few of the SI controls were withdrawn and incorporated elsewhere. You can see they kind of got incorporated all over the place, PL, SI, CM. So those controls have now been added elsewhere. All right, so SI19, again, only impacting the privacy baseline. Remove the following elements of PII from data sets. And you have the parameter to define what those elements are. And then evaluate organization-defined frequency for effectiveness of de-identification. All right, so SI22 just requires you to define what the automated mechanisms are in place for flaw remediation. This impacts moderate and high. SI3 previously was just employ malicious code protection mechanisms. Now the language says to implement, and you can choose signature-based or non-signature-based or both. And then Part B, the malicious code protection mechanisms need to be updated automatically. That was not specified previously. And those are it for SI3. It does impact low, moderate, and high. SI44, this impacts moderate and high. Part A is new. So determine criteria for unusual or unauthorized activities or conditions for inbound and outbound communications traffic. And then Part B has a new parameter. So now you have to define the unusual or unauthorized activities or conditions for monitoring. 410, this only impacts high. Just change for the second parameter here. Used to just say organization-defined system monitoring tools. Now also includes mechanisms. 412 added privacy and also requires you to define the automated mechanisms in place for your automated organization-generated alerts. That's only going to impact your high baseline for 412. 422, again, just a reformat of the same exact language. The implementation of the control is the same, and the nature of the control is the same. This is for your high baseline. 5.1, you now have to define the automated mechanisms in place for broadcasting your alerts and advisory information throughout the organization, again, only impacting high. SI6 just added privacy to the control requirements. SI7, this impacts both moderate and high, so Part B is new. Take the following actions when unauthorized changes to the software, firmware, and information are detected, and then you do have to define what those actions are. 7.5, just a minor change from security safeguards to controls. SI8.2, you have to define the frequency at which your spam protection mechanisms are going to be updated. This does impact both moderate and high. 12, just a minor change, changed language from handles and retains to manage and retain information. Again, SI16, just a minor change, changing security safeguards to controls. And now we are going to get into our last family, which is entirely brand new, SR. So SR is specific to supply chain risk management. It has its own control family now, and we're going to get into all of the different controls that are part of one of the baselines here. So there are a number of different base controls. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 are all new. And then there are 2.1, 11.1, and 11.2 for the enhancements. So we're going to get into each and every one of those. So SR, well, everyone's going to have SR1. That's going to impact your privacy, low, moderate, and high. We already talked about the -1 controls previously. It's formatted exactly the same as all the other -1s, so we won't get into that here. I'm going to go ahead and skip straight to SR2. So supply chain risk management plan. Your low, moderate, and high baselines are all going to require this. So you have to develop a plan for managing supply chain risks associated with the research and development, design, manufacturing, acquisition, delivery, integration, operations and maintenance, and disposal of the following systems, system components, or system services, and then you have to define what those are. Review and update the supply chain risk management plan at an organization-defined frequency or as required to address threat, organizational, or environmental changes, and protect the supply chain risk management plan from unauthorized disclosure and modification. SR2.1, you have to establish a supply chain risk management team consisting of organization-defined personnel roles and responsibilities to lead and support the following supply chain risk management activities, and then define what those activities are. So those are your SR2 enhancement. Moving on to SR3, supply chain controls and processes. So establish a process or processes to identify and address weaknesses or deficiencies in the supply chain elements and processes of organization-defined system or system component in coordination with organization-defined supply chain personnel. Employ the following controls to protect against supply chain risks to the system, system component, or system service, and to limit harm or consequences from supply chain-related events, and define what those controls are. Document the selected and implemented supply chain processes and controls in security and privacy plans, supply chain risk management plan, or other organization-defined document. SR5, you have to employ the following acquisition strategies, contract tools, and procurement methods to protect against, identify, and mitigate supply chain risks, and then define what those strategies, tools, and methods are. SR6 is the first one that does not impact the low baseline. It's only moderate and high. So assess and review the supply chain related risks associated with suppliers or contractors and the system, system component, or system service they provide at an organization-defined frequency. SR8 goes back to impacting the low baseline as well, so notification agreements. Establish agreements and procedures with entities involved in the supply chain for the system, system component, or system service for notification of supply chain compromises, results of assessments or audits, or other organization-defined information. You can choose one or more of those for your parameter selection. SR9 is only for the high baseline, so implement a tamper protection program for the system, system component, or system service. 10 is also only going to impact high baseline. Inspect the following systems or system components at random or at an organization-defined frequency. or both, upon organization-defined indications of need for inspection, to detect tampering, and then define what the systems and system components are for this control. 11 impacts low, moderate, and high. So develop and implement anti-counterfeit policy and procedures that include the means to detect and prevent counterfeit components from entering the system, and report counterfeit system components to the source of the counterfeit component, or organization-defined external reporting organizations, or organization-defined personnel or roles, or more than one of those. 11.1, you are required to train organization-defined personnel or roles to detect counterfeit system components, including hardware, software, and firmware. This does impact your low, moderate, and high. 11.2, maintain configuration control over the following system components awaiting service or repair, and serviced or repaired components awaiting return to service, and then define what those components are. 12, must dispose of organization-defined data, documentation, tools, or system components using the following techniques and methods, and then you have to define what those techniques and methods are, and that is it. So as I said, there was a lot of information that we covered today. We want to thank you for joining us. If you're not sure how these updates for Rev.5 are going to impact your environment, or if you just want help understanding how to implement some of the new Rev.5 controls for your baseline, your environment, if you're interested in more information about the privacy baseline, Hive Systems is here to help. Simply reach out to us at www.hivesystems.io. We will be happy to dive into this a little bit further, answer your questions, and see how we can help you. Before we go, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you can be alerted about our next episode by going to www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. Next month, we'll tackle another great cybersecurity topic, so make sure you don't miss it by subscribing to our channel at www.hivesystems.io/HiveLive. Until next time, remember, when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to act and not react.